Hi guys, this is Shannon from Reptile Way. Welcome back to our channel. We're doing a bit of a build video today, showing you how to build an awesome sort of cave setup for your enclosure, and we're using one of our own children's python's enclosures. His name's Dynamo. We're actually going to renovate his enclosure because he is getting a bit bigger and we do want a bigger cave for him and just to increase that surface area of his enclosure. So we're going to run through this build step by step and for you to create something quite similar at home if you'd like a new DIY project. But let's get into this video. Now to start off with, we've got to get Dynamo out of his enclosure and do a nice clean, as he has left a few little presents. So I completely took everything out, hosed it out, got bleach, got earth dishwashing liquid, did a full-on clean, completely dried it. You want to make sure it's bone dry before you start this build, and put on a movie because the building process is quite a while. I watched a Star Wars marathon through this. But now we're going to get into building the cave, and for this entire build I'm just going to use the foam sheet, so no spray foam needed. I'm using a hot wire cutter as well as a knife. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting the sheets. I've got the enclosure next to me to keep going back and forth and measuring this. And it's going to be a cave with a basking platform all in one, and it's really going to sort of come off that back wall as well as having one stilt to stand on. I'm sort of happy with the rough dimensions. Now I'm carving out that cave area, and I can take one layer off at a time to sort of carve that cave out. Now I'm doing the floor, and I sort of want that cave floor to be rough, not completely smooth. I really want to work on making it look as natural as possible. So I'm using a knife to get in there, really carve out that floor a little bit. And I'm sort of happy with it, so now I'm just sort of putting it all back in the enclosure. I'm seeing whether I'm really happy with those dimensions. And I was happy. Besides, I wanted the cave floor to be a little bit bigger, so I'm just replacing one of the sheets for the cave floor with a bit of a bigger one, and this is just going to ensure when Dynamo grows he will always be able to fit in that cave. Now I'm just taking out the stilt that part of the cave will sit on, carving that to make it look as natural as possible to go with the rest of the build. Now the grouting process, the messiest, longest process. I did about 4 to 5 layers of grout because I wanted it to be thick for that carving. And the grout I used to get these desired colours, I just mixed the light grey and black grout, and also this sticky tape technique over your tracks really stops that grout from getting in there, which will make it a lot easier to clean. I did put plastic bags to stop the grout from dripping directly onto that glass base, and again just for easier cleaning. And I'm continuing doing those layers of grout, and that last layer is going to be sort of my desired colour. I want it to be quite a light grey, and the colours will just go nicely on it when I start that painting process. Now we're going to get into the carving. Now the carving is so important. It's really going to add that natural touch. And you don't have to be an expert in this at all. You just follow your build when it comes to carving. Where you see natural grooves or indentations in the rock, carve that out, emphasize it. And yeah, generally using that technique you can't go wrong. So carving it all, and this does get extremely messy. You're going to get little bits everywhere, so you need to vacuum up in the enclosure, make sure there's no little bits left over for the next phases, and also vacuum the floor and the area that you're working in because it just spreads. But that is the carving finish, the carving of the grout. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. It looks quite nice. It's going to add a lot of enrichment for Dynamo. It'll add all that texture. So when he's moving along it, it's going to feel, you know, quite natural, good. Yeah, hopefully he'll like it. Now we're getting on to the painting phase, and these are sort of all the things you're going to need for the painting. Spray bottle, these paints, I didn't use the red, I just used brown, black and white, a few paint brushes, some paper, and you'll also need something to mix the paints on. Now this process does get really messy. Put sheets up, plastic sheets, plastic bin bags to stop that spray paint from getting on the walls or your desk. So now I've already got water in that spray bottle. I'm adding the black paint. I'm going to shake it up before and spray it somewhere before you start spraying it on there, because it can take a bit of time for the black to come out. A lot of water just comes out at the start. And I'm just spraying the areas where I want it to be naturally dark. So I'm going over all those spots, really emphasizing the darkness of that cave. And a reminder, it is going to get super messy. Black, watery paint will drip absolutely everywhere. So after I've sort of finished all the spray painting, I will clean it up. And again, it's just going to make the cleaning process a lot easier if you do it in steps. So after the grouting I cleaned, after the spray painting I cleaned, waterproofing cleaned. So again, it just makes it a bit easier. Now I'm actually mixing up the dark brown spray paint. So we're using some black, some brown, and with some water, shake it up, and again, spray it on something else before you spray it on there, just to make sure the paint's coming out. And then again, I'm going over the spots where I want to see that dark brown. I'm not really going into the cave too much. I want that cave to stay quite dark and black. But again, this is just going to add a lot more texture, a lot more depth to the piece. So yeah, and I don't want it to be sort of black and grey. I want the colour scheme to be sort of lots of different coloured browns. So that's why I started off with black and then went with the brown spray paint also. Now we're going to get into the dry brushing. Now this will really add those final touches. And you've got to wait for your spray paint to completely dry before you start this phase. And now we're going to mix up the paints. So I'm just using brown, I've got there. We use some black, and then also we'll use some white. So this is again super easy to do, super easy to find as well wherever you are. And I'm going to start off darker. So my first coats of dry brush painting will be quite dark. So we'll start off with a dark brown, and then it'll get lighter and lighter, and that final touch will almost be like white with a little bit of brown, just to make it look extra worn. But we're going to go in first on the piece with this dark brown. Before we do, we want to wipe off all that excess paint. Now you're not going to have this much excess paint all the time. It's just because I was using the paintbrush to mix this. And yep, going over, dry brushing, and again, it's going to hit all those raised areas. So the cracks and, you know, the deep sort of bits are going to stay dark from that spray paint, and this will just really touch up those raised areas. So I'm going over, I'm now mixing up a bit of a lighter brown and going over with that. And again, have a play with it, sort of do a few different browns, stand back, look up close, see how it's looking, and adjust it. You may need to go back in with some dark brown towards the end if you're finding, oh, it's looking a bit too light. So just have a mess around with it and, you know, see how you go, see what's going to look pleasing for you. And also, it's really good to put lights before you finish the painting process. Put some lights above so you can see what it's going to look like. The paint will look slightly different once you add the waterproofing on, so keep that in mind. The waterproofing does sort of dull it down a little bit. But now the final touches are that really sort of lighter colour to add that worn effect. And there we go. That's the sort of painting, finishing, the spray painting and the dry painting all done. And yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with that. Now the only thing is when we get onto the next stage, which is the waterproofing, it does add a little bit of shine. So this looks really, really natural. However, when you do clean it, some of that paint will come off. So it's not really going to be the most sanitary. That's why I do recommend using this clear pond sealer. Now when I was doing this, I couldn't really see in the cave, so I got a torch. And yeah, I sort of started waterproofing those hard to reach spots first. So obviously the cave, underneath the cave, that sort of stilt, I did that bit first. So yeah, it's better to do those really hard to reach places first, and then you can sort of do all the easier spots towards the end. Now this does get super messy. You will need to use a cloth to wipe up all that waterproofing that's going to go on the floor. I didn't even put bags, plastic bags down, because this waterproofing just goes through it, or it'll trickle off somewhere or another. So have plenty of those blue chuck cloths or rags, and wipe it all up after you've done each layer. And I only used about 3 layers of waterproofing on this. Wash your brush that you're using. Wash all that waterproofing off, otherwise your brush is going to go solid. Now I wanted it to look sort of nice and blended, and not for it to have like harsh edges, so I stuck rocks along the outskirts to really blend it in with that existing rock wall. And again, this is just aquarium grade silicone rocks, and I did clean the rocks, clean them with earth dishwashing liquid water, and completely dried them. So that's what it's looking like now. I wanted to add a bit of an Aussie touch, so I found these really cool eucalyptus fake plant branches, and I think that adds a really nice touch, nice colour. And I'm happy with this. We've got all the hard stuff out the way. I've done a full clean of the enclosure again. I've siliconed around that stilt, because that's an area that's going to get potentially quite damp from the substrate, so, and that's where it could crack, so I wanted to completely watertight that. Now before I put the substrate in, using that sticky tape technique, I do not want any of the substrate going in those tracks. It'll make it a pain. It's hard to get out. So here we go. We're using a combination of these 2 products that I'll put up on the screen for you. This just looks really nice. I love the colour of this substrate, especially with this particular design. It makes it look quite earthy, foresty, so yeah, and it holds moisture in quite nicely, so especially for a children's python, humidity, you want it to be ideally around 50-55%, can be higher, can be lower. They can really survive between 30% to 90+% humidity. But yeah, so I'm quite liking this substrate. Now I'm adding the final touches. I'm putting some of these sort of big vines in. Now you will notice I am covering up a vent. Do not worry, there's a big massive vent on the other side, and also the lid is mesh. So there is so much ventilation in this enclosure, and I wanted this to be sort of a safe hidey side for Dynamo. So yeah, I built up the vegetation on that side. You can see we've got a big exposed vent on that side still. And we're gonna pop Dynamo into his new enclosure to explore. Oh my god, this is probably one of my favourite moments, when he actually gets to go in. And you have to wait a week for the waterproofing to dry, the silicone to dry, before you can sort of put your little guy in. But he was exploring everywhere, had an absolute ball, and I think he's going to fit nicely. That cave is huge. So he's about over 2 years old, Dynamo. So yeah, I think it'll fit him when he is, you know, in a couple years time, when he is reaching his maximum size. I did put that water dish in there as well, but I just wanted to get some footage before I put the water dish in. Dynamo being a little poser there, flicking his tongue, exploring, and I don't know what he's doing here. But anyway, I'm absolutely loving how this build turned out. I think it's going to provide so much enrichment for Dynamo, and on to the next build. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I really hope this video did help you out, gave you some ideas, gave you a little bit of inspiration of what you can do in your enclosures. And if you did find the video useful, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. And if you want to see future videos, hit subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.